Thomas Hardy. When you hear that name, you probably think of bleak, windswept landscapes, tragic heroes, and just this overwhelming sense of gloom, right? But how did the guy who wrote Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure end up with such a famously dark worldview? Well, today we're going to dig into the life and mind of Hardy to figure out exactly where all that pessimism came from.
But here's the weird thing we have to start with. This is a quote from Hardy himself, and he sounds genuinely confused. He just released a poetry collection, and the critics were calling it gloomy. And his reaction? He basically said, "What are you talking about? I thought I put too many funny poems in there." So right away, we see a guy who did not see himself as some kind of master of misery.
And this creates this huge disconnect, right? On one side, you've got his reputation, the great fatalist, the ultimate pessimist of English literature. But then you have the man himself, who spent his life denying it. He'd say, no, I'm just writing down my impressions of the world. He even called himself an evolutionary meliorist, which is someone who thinks things can, slowly get better over time. That doesn't sound very gloomy, does it?
That's the real puzzle here. Was he a philosopher of despair, or was he just a misunderstood realist? To figure this out, we need to look at the evidence, and we're going to start right at the beginning of his life.
So, to guide our investigation, we're leaning on this really amazing study from 1935 by Pettigrew Elliott. It's called Fatalism in the Works of Thomas Hardy, and it's this incredible deep dive that really connects the dots between the man, his world, and his work.
Okay, so let's jump right into this paradox, this artist who just could not shake his own reputation.
First things first, let's just make sure we're on the same page with this word fatalism. Basically, it's the belief that everything is already decided by fate, that our lives are on a set path and we can't really do anything to change it. This is the big idea people always attach to Hardy's novels. But Hardy, he pushed back against this, hard. He said he wasn't some philosopher with a big, gloomy system. He insisted he was more like a journalist, just painting an honest picture of life as he saw it. He even argued that his take on life, that it's basically a thing to be put up with, wasn't pessimism. He thought it was just where the modern world was headed. But here's the thing. All the evidence suggests that this worldview wasn't some intellectual idea he just came up with. It seems like it was baked into his DNA from the second he was born. And I mean that literally. His life almost ended before it even started. The doctor delivered him, thought he was stillborn, and just tossed him in a basket. It was only because a nurse looked over and said, "Stop a minute, he's alive enough, sure," that he was saved. Talk about a rough start. And as a kid, he had this crazy, almost painful level of sensitivity. He'd hear certain happy, upbeat dance tunes and just start crying. And he'd try so hard to hide it, forcing himself to keep dancing so no one would see the tears. This one just blows my mind. As a little boy, perfectly healthy, happy family, he was lying in a field one day, looked up at the sky, and just felt so small and insignificant that he decided then and there that he would rather not grow up. That's not your typical childhood thought. So what does all this add up to? Well, unlike most kids, he couldn't stand being around other children. He found them annoying. He would actively walk home from school by himself just to get away from them. He craved solitude. This wasn't something he learned. It was just who he was. So you've got this kid who's already wired for melancholy, and then you drop him into an environment that basically just cranks the volume up on that feeling. Imagine growing up near this place, Egdon Heath. It's stark, it's wild, it's beautiful, but it's also desolate. It's a landscape just soaked in history, covered in ancient Roman ruins and burial mounds. He was literally surrounded by the symbols of decay and the long, slow, indifferent march of time. And this feeling of decay wasn't just in the landscape, it was personal. He was obsessed with his family tree, but he saw it as a story of decline, of a family that had come down in the world. And in the end, he was the only one of his siblings to marry, and he never had children. For him, he was the end of the line. A poem he wrote on his 86th birthday just sums it all up perfectly. He's talking directly to the world and he says, "You know what? You kept your promise. You turned out to be exactly as you said you would be." And this is the real kicker. He felt that the world gave him a wise warning when he was just a kid. It told him, hey, don't expect too much. Don't expect things to be fair or happy. Just expect neutral-tinted haps, random, colorless events. He believed that this early lesson helped him get through his whole pretty unhappy life. Okay, so we've got his natural personality, and we've got the world he grew up in.
But there's one more huge piece to this puzzle that really sealed the deal on his fatalism, a massive crisis of faith.
Now get this, the guy whose books would eventually be condemned from church pulpits, he actually wanted to be a parson when he was young. It was his dream. He came from a family of church musicians, and he was seriously studying to take holy orders. But here's the problem. Hardy's brain was just too critical. He couldn't just accept things on faith. When he started seriously studying the arguments for things like infant baptism, he was actually horrified by how weak he thought the logic was. So this wasn't just him drifting away from religion, it was a painful intellectual struggle that ended with him realizing he just couldn't believe anymore.
Years later, he said something that's actually pretty heartbreaking. He admitted he was desperate to believe in God, in something supernatural. He wanted to, but his logical mind just couldn't find any proof. So he was left with a universe that felt empty, without a kind, guiding hand.
And that brings us right back to where we started, back to that paradox. If his worldview was so deeply ingrained in him, from birth, from his environment, from his loss of faith, why did he fight so hard against the label of pessimist?
I think the answer is actually pretty simple. Hardy probably wasn't being dishonest. He was just so completely convinced that his view of the world was the correct one that he didn't see it as a philosophy at all. To him, it was just reality. In his mind, the optimists were the ones who were delusional, refusing to look at the hard truths of an indifferent universe. He was just the guy brave enough to write it all down.
So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Is calling someone a pessimist just an easy way to dismiss an uncomfortable point of view? Maybe Thomas Hardy wasn't defined by his gloominess at all. Maybe he was defined by something much rarer, the courage to stare right into the abyss and tell us exactly what he saw.